Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Spartan Showcase. I'm your host, Joey Dubois. Today I'm joined by our principal, Mr. Rubin, and our superintendent, Mr. Carney. We will focus on the closure of McCloskey Middle School and the move of 8th grade into the high school. Thank you for joining me, gentlemen.
Thank you, Joseph.
Thanks,
Good
Joe.
to see you.
Good to see you too, Mr. Carney. So, is this a permanent plan, or would you hope to build a new middle school eventually and return to the current alignment of schools?
Well, I think a lot of factors go into play when you are going through a configuration plan for your grade levels and your facilities. One being, obviously, what determines and with the number of students that you have, where can you fit? So we've been looking at this plan over the last probably 2.5 years with declining enrollment. Most communities across the Commonwealth have seen declining enrollment over the past decade. So with rising fixed costs for our schools, we have to determine what we can afford, and it got to the point where running the McCloskey Middle School was too expensive for us to upkeep, and with our student population, we could fit into 3 buildings. Is it going to be a long-term plan? We see it probably at least for the next 10 to 20 years, given the trends that we've seen in declining enrollment in Uxbridge, with declining enrollment in the state, with the number of students, with the trend data that we've seen going to other schools, elementary schools, whether it be private, whether it be charter schools, whether it be school choice students attending other public schools. The trend data has proven to us that we should be able to fit in these buildings for the next several years.
If these trends did somehow change and enrollment was to increase and building a new school would not be an option, how will even more students fit into the high school and every other building?
So this building here, where you attend school, is built for 600. It has the ability to expand to 800 students. So that's one option that the community has if student enrollment increases. Some communities near me, for instance, Natick public schools are looking to expand one of their middle schools. And for several years, they've put in what's called modular classrooms. So there are options. There are plenty of options for the community of Uxbridge if student populations, do expand. And you have a lot of land in town. So if ever a new building was need to be built, there are options there.
What was the reason for not closing McCloskey when the new high school was built?
Well, I believe that the district at that time wanted to maintain the structure of a primary level school where you had pre-K through grade 2 in one building, a traditional 6, 7, and 8 model, a higher elementary model, excuse me. So it went from pre-K through grade 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they like the traditional 6, 7, and 8 model for middle schools, and a high school naturally being a 9 through 12. So they felt for that the foreseeable future they could do that, and wanted to do that. Unfortunately, through capital improvement projects and the need for them at that particular building at McCloskey, the town has been unable to fund those improvements. So that was also a factor in this, not just declining enrollment, the increasing capital projects that were not filled.
Going forward, what will happen to the McCloskey building?
Any number of things. The school committee has options before it considers turning the school over to the town. We've talked earlier this year about making it an early college and higher education center. Mr. Rubin and his staff over the past 2 years have been looking for, to expand early college programming for the high school students. We know from the state level that there's more of an emphasis on collaboration and the need for collaboration than ever before. And what I mean by that is how are local public school systems working with nearby public school systems? How is an inter-district collaboration and partnerships, how are they evolving to partnerships with the workforce and colleges and university? So we've been working on this for quite some time. There's a potential with the closure of that building and it not being occupied that it could become an early college and higher education center for not just Uxbridge students, but for students throughout the region.
And one of the things I would say I'm excited about is over the last few months, I think we've started to, I would say, like grow, sort of like planted some seeds with some of the surrounding communities about just the lack of some of those options in this area. This year even as we're taping this interview, there are 25 kids upstairs taking acuplacer to get students ready for potentially taking their first year of college courses while they're still at Uxbridge High School. And there's an economic reason for that for families. It's good to get some college credits under your belt. That's why a lot of kids have taken AP classes over the years. So, and at the same time, we're breaking down those walls of, well, you do your thing over in Northbridge, and you do your thing over in Uxbridge, and we do our thing over in Blackstone Millville, and you do your thing over there in Douglas. When the reality is, after 4 years of high school, you're all kind of going to the same places anyways. So what are some of the things we can do to support that? And I think one of the other things you'll see in the next few years is not just that partnership from education, but there's an entire generation of people that are not going to be working anymore. I'm not in that generation, Joe, not yet. Neither is my boss over here. We've got a long way to go. But there's a generation of people that were born after World War II that are going to start getting to retirement age, 60s and 70s, that are going to stop working. And this region happens to have a lot of job openings. So as students walk out of high school and are maybe not necessarily sure of what they want to do or what their skills are going to be, and rather than going off to college and taking on a lot of debt and potentially studying something that doesn't really fulfill them or lead to a job at the end, well, maybe we can do some training right here in town, and maybe we can have the employers do that. And that particular part of town is really well situated for that. And if that all comes together, it'd be great. There've been a lot of communities that have taken, around the country, that have taken these old buildings and just refurbished them or put something else in their place. And so I think my hope for this community, regardless of what happens with it in the next few weeks, is that particular parcel of land and that particular spot remains what it was intended to be almost 100 years ago when they opened it. And that's an educational institution. And as education evolves and as our classrooms evolve, I mean, you're in class right now and you're doing something that you hope to do when you leave and that has hopefully lit a fire under you. We want that for 500 kids, 600 kids. And with the opportunity of the 8th graders here next year, from an academic standpoint, we get that first. And I'm excited about that as well.
So on the other side of that, to answer your question, if the school committee and the other boards, like the Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee, believe that this concept is not feasible, at least for the short term, but it's too expensive to maintain it as a school for right now, what they have the option of doing is declaring it as surplus and putting it out for what's called a request for a proposal. You may hear this acronym called RFPs every once in a while. And basically what that is you're putting the school out, the building up for auction, and another group or outfit could purchase that property.
What will start times be for each building, and will the move affect busing at all?
I really wish they were later. Just throwing that out there.
Hey, it won't affect me.
For some of the high school kids who would like to come to school maybe a half hour later, I'm sure they would appreciate that. But that's not changing, I don't think.
Right now, the bus schedule does drive the start times for the schools, and in this year of transition, we're trying to minimize as much change as possible. We're moving 4 grade levels to different buildings. Staff, students are changing. The clock, if you will, the start and end times of schools impacts families in their personal lives too. And I mean that for our staff and for our students, whether it's job related for adults, whether it's activity related for kids, whether it's the time when parents get their children to school or to daycare in the morning. All of those things have to play into our decision making. So we're going to try to minimize that change. The high schools stay the same. time for opening and closing. The Taft School will likely stay the same for when it opens and closes. And the Whiten Middle School, Whiten Intermediate School will be aligned more closely to the start and end times for what McCloskey is right now. So with that, I want to say there's only 1 or 2 grade levels out of the 13 that we have that have an adjustment in time.
Will 8th graders who choose to go to a different high school after the 8th grade year be affected in any way when it comes time to apply to a different high school?
I think the only effect they're going to have is emotional, and I say that, you know, there's not going to be any, you know, roadblocks set up for students who wish to apply to private or the local regional technical school, but I think emotionally it's going to be tougher for some kids. When you're already in a place and you're already feeling tethered to it or connected in some way, I think it's going to be harder for some kids to get up and go when they've already made connections through our, you know, through our drama program or through the student council or through sports or with some of the teachers that are in the building. I think that's going to make it harder. So I think the effect is going to be emotional. From a logistical standpoint, not really. I mean, you know, the act of, or the process of, say, applying to a regional technical school is what we hope right now for families difficult, because, you know, one of the goals that I set out a couple of years ago when I got here was I want people to feel like they have a 1 and a 1A. When they apply to BVT or they apply to, you know, a private school or St. John's or St. Peter Marian or Mount St. Charles or the schools in Providence, or any of them, that they realize that they're leaving a great option for another great option, and weigh out those pros and cons. We're going to add in another really big pro, and that's that you're already here. So I think the effect is going to be emotional. I don't think it's going to be logistical. We'll support families that have those decisions to make. And, you know, I like to complicate people's thinking. I want them to make the decision that's best for them. It's not all that different than what you're going through when you start looking for college. And we want to model that. You know, if you get, you know, 4 years from now, you look back and you've got 10 job offers on the table, which we hope for you. We want you to be able to sit there and say, hey, I've done this before. I've made the difficult decision before, and then I've gone all in. Because I also don't want people to, much like when we pick classes, like, oh, I'll give this a try. And no, if you're going to make that decision, make the decision that's best for you and your family. I think we've got a really good product here. I think we've got a great school. I think we have unbelievable people. So if you're an 8th grader and you're already here, good luck with your decision, and we'll support you. But when you make that decision, you've made that decision. And go for it and head strong, and we'll be there to pick you up if you fall. It's not that different than applying to college, applying for work, or, you know, trying something new in class.
So I think Mr. Rubin and I have always had the same philosophy, where we try to open doors of opportunities for kids, in as many doors as they possibly can be, rather than limit them. So the complications that he talks about, we want to complicate your thinking. What that means is you have difficult decisions in front of you, but they're good ones, and you've put yourself in a position where you'll fit where you decide. You have that before you. I've seen your name on a number of those sheets of paper out there for college acceptances. You have a difficult decision to make, and you have to trust that your educators, that you have put yourself in a position where you're going to attend the school that best fits you. So Mr. Rubin and I have always taken that mentality where we're not in competition with other school districts. We're going to focus on what we believe we do well, and the choice is ultimately in the hands of our students. And I hope that we've made that decision for you somewhat difficult, and you're making the choice based on the skills that you've developed, and you're looking at either the programs here, or the programs at BVT, or the programs at Norfolk Aggie, or the programs at St. John's, or any other school out there for high schools, that there's something about that culture and their scope and sequence of programs and coursework that I want to be a part of. And that's what it comes down to. We take a student-centered approach here, and we hope to position you in any direction that you want to take.
Well, that's all I got for today. So thank you guys so much for joining me.
Thank you, Joe.
It was a pleasure, Joe. Thank you for having us.
No problem.